When I was in elementary school, my friends and I built a secret base deep in the mountains behind our school. Although it was called a secret base, it was quite elaborate, with multiple boards nailed together to create a small hut about 3 tatami mats in size, which could keep out wind and rain. We used it like our own house, eating snacks, reading erotic books, and hanging out there after school. The base was used by me, Shin, June, and 2 stray dogs. During the summer vacation of my 5th grade year, we decided to stay overnight at the secret base and play. We lied to our parents, telling them we were staying at a friend's house, and gathered our allowances to buy snacks, fireworks, and juice, more excited than we had been for our school trip. We met at the school around 5 p.m. and headed to the mountain. After about an hour of hiking up the mountain, we arrived at our secret base. The area around the base was also the territory of 2 stray dogs named Happy and Touch, so as we approached the base, the dogs would come out of nowhere wagging their tails to greet us. We petted their heads and gave each of them a snack, thanking them for their welcome. When we arrived at the base, we put our belongings in the hut, and since it was still light outside, we went fishing at the big pond nearby. We only caught bullfrogs, though. By the way, the frogs we caught were used as dog food. As we were fishing, the surroundings gradually began to get darker, so we started setting off fireworks. The 2 stray dogs were more excited than us. We had bought a lot of fireworks, but within 30 minutes they were all gone, so we went back to the hut. The secret base at night was a new experience for all of us. It was in the deep mountains, so there were no streetlights, only moonlight. All we could hear were the sounds of insects. In the dimly lit hut with only one makeshift light, the 3 of us initially chatted about our crushes and gossip about our teachers while munching on snacks. But as we heard occasional sounds of something falling into the pond or the footsteps of some animal, we gradually became scared. As time passed, we began to feel more and more scared, saying things like, "Did you hear that sound just now? And what if a bear comes?" It wasn't just joking around anymore, we were genuinely frightened. It was 9 p.m., and the inside of the small hut was hot and humid, with mosquitoes buzzing around. It was not a comfortable environment for sleeping. But more than that, we were overwhelmed by the unique atmosphere of the mountain, and we all regretted coming there. We discussed how to get through until tomorrow morning, and as the cabin was stuffy and we couldn't see the surroundings, such as bears approaching, we decided to descend the mountain. Inwardly, I just wanted to get home as soon as possible. We relied on the flashlight to light our path and began to walk down a bit faster. For about 5 minutes, Happy and Tatch were running around us, which was reassuring, but then the 2 dogs went back to the base. Even on a path we'd walked many times before, it felt like we were in a completely different space at night. We walked silently and focused on not slipping on the 30 cm wide trail. At that moment, Shin grabbed my shoulder from behind and whispered, "Someone's there." We immediately lay flat on the ground and turned off our flashlight when Shin grabbed my shoulder from behind and whispered, "Someone's there." Listening closely, we could hear footsteps. The sound of someone walking on 2 feet through the bushes. We strained our eyes to try to see who it was. The sound was coming from some thick bushes about 20 to 30 meters away from us. The person had a flashlight in one hand and was holding what looked like a long stick in the other. The person were using the stick to push through the foliage and climb up the mountain. At first we were scared, but when we realized that the figure was a human and that there was only one person, our fear disappeared and our hearts were filled with childish curiosity. When I muttered, "I wonder who that guy is? Should we follow him?" the 2 of them showed smiles that seemed to say, "Of course." We carefully followed the faint light of the figure's flashlight and the sound of rustling grass. The person stopped and put down their bag, fumbling around with something on their back. We were about 30 meters behind the person, so we couldn't see any details like their gender or what they were doing exactly, just a faint silhouette. I wondered aloud, what is that person doing all alone up here? Maybe they're here to catch stag beetles or something. Shin suggested, "Let's get closer." So we crept closer and closer, careful not to step on any twigs or leaves, and crouched down to stay hidden. As we approached with grins on our faces, thinking about what kind of mischief we could play on this mysterious figure, a high-pitched sound rang out. My heart felt like it was going to stop. "Khan! Khan!" it continued. For a moment, we didn't know what was happening and turned to look at June and Shin. Then June pointed and said, "It's him. He's doing something." I looked over to see what the figure was up to. "Khan! Khan!" Con, he was hitting something against a tree. I couldn't see what it was, but I immediately realized it was a curse ritual. I was scared and said, "Let's run." But Shin whispered, "Hey, it's a woman. Let's take a look." June started to get excited and said, "Don't you want to see what her face looks like? Don't you want to get closer?" Shin and June began to move forward, and I reluctantly followed them because I didn't want to be called a coward. As we got closer to the girl, I heard a sound besides the pounding of nails. The girl was muttering something like a spell. We took a slight detour and hid ourselves behind a tree about 8 meters diagonally behind the woman. The woman had shoulder-length hair and a slender figure. She placed her backpack and flashlight at her feet and proceeded to nail something like a photo onto a nearby object, and she had already nailed in 6 or 7 nails. Suddenly, a sound of woof made us turn around, and there were Happy and Touch wagging their tails and looking at us with a questioning face as if to ask, "What are you doing?" The next moment, Shin screamed in a weirdly loud voice and ran away. When we turned back, we saw the woman with a demonic expression on her face, holding a hammer in one hand, and shouting something like Aya, then she ran towards us. I was grabbed from behind on my left shoulder and pulled back with tremendous force, causing me to fall. I quickly stood up and followed Shin's lead, but before I could run, the woman grabbed me and stomped on my chest, causing me to vomit. At first, I didn't know what was happening, but then I realized that the woman was standing on my chest and grinding her foot into me while gritting her teeth and making an indescribable noise. The pain was gone, replaced by fear. I could tell that the woman was trembling slightly, probably in the throes of excitement. I couldn't take my eyes off her. If I did, I thought she might hit me over the head with her hammer. Even in that situation, or maybe because of that situation, I remember the woman's face vividly. She was probably around 40 years old, with a slightly gaunt face, bulging eyes, and clenched teeth with a slight underbite, trembling as she looked down at me. For me, that situation felt like it lasted 10 to 20 minutes, but I don't remember exactly. As the woman was trampling on me and bending over, slowly getting closer to my face, Touch jumped onto her back. She panicked for a moment and lost her balance, releasing the foot she had been pressing down on me with. Happy also ran over and started playfully bothering the woman. Probably because they were used to playing with us, the 2 dogs didn't have any wariness towards humans. I quickly took advantage of the situation to get up and run away. "Hurry! Hurry!" Shin and June were shining their flashlights from a distance. I ran towards the light. Thud! There was a dull sound behind me. I had no time to look back and just kept running. By the time Shin, June, and I got through the mountain, it was past midnight. We couldn't hear any footsteps, but we felt like that woman was chasing us, so we ran all the way back to Shin's house. When we arrived at Shin's house, for some reason, laughter welled up inside me. Was it because I was released from extreme tension? However, June burst into tears. When I said, "We can't go back to that secret base anymore. That woman might be looking for us," June started crying and said, "You idiot. We have to go back when it's morning and bright." I was confused, but then Shun told me, "You were able to escape from that woman thanks to Happy and Touch. When she was about to hit you from behind, Happy jumped in and got hit instead." Afterwards, when I asked Shin, he told me that when I started running, the woman tried to hit me from behind, but Happy jumped on her and took the blow instead. Then, when she went for another swing, Touch playfully jumped around her feet, causing her to accidentally hit him instead. The woman briefly looked at us but didn't pursue us, instead continuously hitting the 2 dogs with the hammer. We just kept running. Shin suggested that we could go back into the mountain in the morning. However, there was more terror waiting for us. Due to our excitement, we couldn't sleep until dawn, and took a nap from morning until noon before heading towards the mountain. We all brought bats and air guns in case of the middle-aged woman. When we arrived at the entrance of the mountain, Shin suggested that we take a different route since she might still be there. As we got closer to the spot where we encountered the middle-aged woman, tension began to rise, and we fell silent with heavy steps. The atmosphere felt unreal, with the bright daylight and the sound of cicadas ringing throughout the mountain, making last night's events seem like a lie. Our steps became heavier. We approached the spot where the memories of yesterday's events became vivid, and our hands holding the bats were sweating from tension. We saw the tree where the woman had hit something. As we got closer, we were speechless. On the tree, there were countless nails hammered into a photo of a small child, a girl around 4 or 5 years old. But that wasn't what surprised us. At the base of the tree, we saw the horrific sight of Happy's lifeless body. His tongue was hanging out, he was covered in blood, and a nail was sticking out from between his eyebrows. We were speechless and couldn't bring ourselves to get any closer. Flies and insects we had never seen before were swarming around, and for the first time, we understood the true meaning of death. I was overwhelmed by the sight of Happy's mangled body and immediately wanted to go home, thinking that if I ever met the middle-aged woman again, I would end up like Happy. At that moment, June exclaimed, "Touch. Touch's body is gone. Touch might still be alive." Then Shin also chimed in, "Touch must have escaped. He must be at the secret base." I too hoped that Touch was still alive. The three of us ran towards the secret base. We had almost reached the place where we could see the base when Shin suddenly stopped. Thinking it might be the middle-aged woman, June and I hurriedly lay flat on the ground. As we looked up at Shin in silence, he pointed to the base and said, "What is that?" As I and June slowly stood up, we gazed at the base. There was something strange about it. Something was attached to the roof of the base. As we approached it little by little, we found June's knapsack that he had forgotten last night, he always carries sweets in it, was hammered to the roof of the base with countless nails. We were shocked. This secret base has been discovered by that middle-aged woman, we thought. Shin approached the base, gripping the bat with fear. June and I held our air guns slightly behind, as we stood a little further back. There might be the middle-aged woman inside the base. Shin slowly reached for the doorknob, and then quickly pulled the door open. Ah! Shin was surprised and fell onto his butt as he backed up towards us. We didn't know what he was scared of, so we aimed our guns and slowly peered into the base. There, we saw Touch's mutilated body. Ah! June and I reacted the same way as Shin. Touch also had a nail driven into his forehead. Last night, I deeply regretted coming to this mountain and getting involved with such an unimaginable person. For a while, the three of us stood there in shock, staring at Touch's lifeless body. But then, Shin pointed inside the base and exclaimed, "Hey, look over there." Silently, June and I followed his gaze and peered into the cabin. We noticed something strange about the walls and floorboards. There were carved letters. As we approached and examined them closely, we realized that they said, "Curse and kill June, curse and kill June, curse and kill June." Countless nails had been used to carve these words into the walls and floors. Why are our names known? At that moment, Shin said, "Isn't June's bag there with his name on it?" I looked up at the bag nailed to the roof. Sure enough, it had June's class and name written on it. June burst into tears. Shin and I were close to tears as well. Our class and names had been exposed to the middle-aged woman. There was no escape. Our identities would soon be revealed as well. My mind went blank. We would all end up like Happy and Touch, with nails driven into our foreheads and killed. Shin said, "Let's tell the police. We can't run away from this anymore." I panicked and said, "If we tell the police, they'll find out about our secret base and that we lied about coming here last night. Our parents will be angry." Well, at the time, I was more afraid of getting scolded by my parents than anything else. But June kept crying, and I couldn't find any words to comfort him. He silently tore off the name tag from the ripped bag and shoved it into his pocket. We walked down the mountain in silence with June still crying. I felt like the middle-aged woman was watching us from somewhere, and I couldn't help but feel nervous. As we descended, Shin said, "Let's not come to this mountain again. If we stay away for a while, that woman will forget about us." I replied, "Yeah, and let's keep this incident a secret between us. If anyone tells her, we might be in danger." Shin nodded in agreement, but June continued to cry while wiping away his tears with his sleeve. After we parted ways that day, we didn't meet up for the rest of the summer break. 2 weeks into the new school year, we noticed that June wasn't in class. Shin and I thought, did that woman do something to him, and decided to visit June's house on our way home from school. When we rang the doorbell, June's mother answered with a cheerful hello. When I asked, "Where's June?" the woman replied cheerfully, "Thanks for coming to visit. He's in his room, so go on up." So, Shin and I headed to June's room. "June, we're coming in," we announced as we entered the room. June was lying in bed reading a manga and seemed surprisingly okay. Shin and I felt a little relieved. When I and Shin tried to talk to June, he remained silent, closing his manga and looking down. Then, Atsushi's mother came in with some snacks and juice, saying, "This child hasn't been feeling well for about 10 days now because of the hives. Maybe he's been eating too many snacks?" She continued jokingly and left the room. Shin and I laughed, saying, "Don't threaten me. Don't scare us like that, it's just a hives. Did you eat food that fell on the ground?" But June remained silent and didn't laugh. When Shin asked him, "Hey, June, what's wrong?" June took off his t-shirt without saying anything, revealing red spots all over his body. It was definitely hives. I said, "It's just a bug. We can apply some medicine to cure it, right?" But June replied, "This is that woman's curse," while showing his back. There were indeed numerous hives on his back. When Shin said, "Why do you think it's a curse? Forget about it already." June raised his voice slightly and said, "Look at my right side." It was true that the right side was the worst place with the hives, but I didn't understand why he linked it to a curse. Then June said, "Take a good look. This looks like a face." When Shin and I took a closer look, we were shocked. Indeed, there was a 5 centimeter wide face. No, it looked like a woman's face, with the skin blistered and swollen. I and Shin said, "You're worrying too much, aren't you? It does look a little bit like a face, but it's not that big of a deal." However, June replied, "It definitely looks like a face. I'm the only one cursed, after all." I and Shin couldn't find the right words to say to June, and his atmosphere was overwhelming. Normally gentle and kind June seemed a little disturbed with a pale face and lifeless eyes. He was probably mentally cornered. I and Shin suddenly felt uncomfortable at June's house, so we decided to leave. On the way home, I asked Shin, "What do you think? Is it a curse?" Shin replied, "There's no such thing as a curse in this world." For some reason, his words encouraged me. 3 days passed, and June still didn't come to school. I and Shin were hesitant to call June, and we didn't know how he was doing. However, our class teacher said June is taking a break because of hives, so we were slightly relieved. However, strange rumors began to spread around school during this time. The rumor was that on the route to school, there is an old lady wearing a trench coat and sandals who stares intently at each schoolchild's face. Upon hearing this rumor, I was deeply shaken after realizing that I was the only one who had come face to face with her. I confided in Shin about it, and he tried to calm me down by saying, "It's okay. It was at night, so she couldn't have seen you. Plus, even if she did see you that day, she's probably forgotten all about it." Surprisingly, Shin was quite calm and collected. What was even more unpleasant was that Shin and I took completely opposite routes to school. While Shin lived nearby with June, who was absent, I had to walk home alone. So I asked Shin, "Can we walk home together for a while? I'm scared." Shin looked a little exasperated, but he agreed, saying, "Until June comes back." From that day on, Shin accompanied me all the way to my house on our way home. From that day on, I started walking home with Shin. We didn't encounter the rumored trenchcoat woman, an estimated middle-aged woman, at school that day, nor the next day or the day after. However, the rumors about the trenchcoat woman continued to circulate throughout the school. On the 5th day of walking home with Shin, we decided to visit June, who had been absent for a while. We brought him orange jelly dessert from the school lunch as a gift. When we arrived at June's house and rang the doorbell, his aunt greeted us with a smile and let us in. June still looked unwell. Although the Jana machine had mostly disappeared, June himself said that the face on his side was getting bigger every day. However, Shin and I couldn't understand what he meant. In fact, he looked better than the last time we saw him. June was probably suffering from emotional shock. We didn't tell June about the rumors of the trench coat woman circulating at school. Just as we were about to leave, June's aunt followed after us and asked with a worried expression, "Is June being bullied in class or something?" We denied it, but I felt a little guilty for not being able to tell her the real reason. 3 days later, for the first time in a while, Nato, Sasaki, and the 4 of us walked home together. Nato was big, Sasaki was short. The rumors about the middle-aged woman were fading away in our minds. Even if the trench coat woman at school actually existed, she seemed like a completely different person. We decided to go play games in front of the station that day and took a different path than usual. That was our mistake. As we were walking and chatting happily, Sasaki suddenly said, "Hey, isn't that the trenchcoat lady?" Nato exclaimed, "Oh no, seriously? Gross." I looked to see the trenchcoat lady and silently wished, "Please, let it be someone else." She was standing on the hot asphalt road, holding a grocery bag in one hand, with her head down and no expression on her face. Shin seemed to be on guard and whispered to us, "Don't make eye contact." We gradually approached the woman, and tension built up. The woman remained motionless, still looking down. When we were about 5 meters away from her, she suddenly lifted her head and stared at the four of us. I panicked. I was desperate to maintain my composure. The events of that day flashed back in my mind when I saw her face for a moment, and my heart almost leapt out of my mouth. There was no doubt about it. She was a middle-aged woman. I walked past with my head down. I was scared that she might attack me at any moment. How much time had passed? No, it felt like a few seconds lasted an eternity. Nato laughed and said, "Did you see her eyes? She's completely crazy." Sasaki also made fun, saying, "She's dressed like that even in this damn heat." Ha! Shin and I couldn't laugh. Sasaki continued, "Oh. Did she hear us? She is looking at us." I instinctively turned around. I locked eyes with the middle-aged woman, her expressionless face turned into a creepy, disgusting smile. My spine froze. Did she notice me? Did she recognize my face? If so, why hasn't she attacked me yet? Nato joked, "Oh no, she's still looking at us." Sasaki, she heard you talking bad about her. I had nothing to do with it, trying to play it off. The game was no longer important. After turning the corner and no longer seeing the woman, I grabbed Shin's arm and said, "Let's go home." Shin looked at me for a moment and then said, "Oh, wasn't there cram school today? We have to go home." So we ran in the opposite direction of our homes. After a while, I said to Shin, "That woman, she's definitely after us. She had that look in her eyes." To my surprise, Shin remained calm and replied, "Yeah, she was definitely looking at our faces. She probably knows our grade in class, and even June's handkerchief. We can't run from her forever. Maybe we should tell the police and get their help." I was silent for a moment, but eventually I agreed that we had no other choice. I asked, "But what do we tell them?" Shin replied, "We can show them pictures of the mountain where we found the photos and the dead body, and tell them that the woman is the suspect. With that evidence, the police should be able to catch her." I reluctantly agreed, even though I didn't want to go back to that mountain. We decided to go there together after school the next day. We agreed to go to the back mountain after school tomorrow. When we tried to go home, we took a terrifyingly roundabout way because we didn't know where the middle-aged woman was lurking. It took us 2 hours to get home, which would normally take 20 minutes. When I got home, I immediately called Shin and asked, "Do you think our house is known by middle-aged women? What should we do if she comes tonight?" I could understand why June was mentally disturbed, with his name known and "Cursed June to Death" carved on the hut. Shin reassured me, "Don't worry, it won't be exposed so easily." At that moment, I realized that although I thought we were talking as equals, Shin was like an older brother to me. Of course, I couldn't sleep that night. I was scared by the slightest noise, and when I closed my eyes, I thought of the grinning face of a middle-aged woman. Morning came, and we went to school and attended classes. After school, at 3:30 p.m., Shin and I arrived at the entrance to the back mountain. I hesitated to enter the mountain. The middle-aged woman, the killed Happy and Touch, and countless nails vividly recalled the events of that night in my head. I watched Shin's behavior. Shin was silent, staring at the mountain. He must be scared too. I knew it, it's scary to go in. I secretly wished he would say that. Shin took out an instant camera from his pants pocket, held it in his right hand, and whispered, betraying my expectations, "All right." He immediately ran into the mountain. I ran after him, feeling pulled by his back. Shin kept running without looking back. I desperately followed him because I was afraid to be alone. Looking back now, Shin must have been scared too. That's why he ran without looking around. That place gradually approached. Even though I didn't want to remember the events of that night, fear spread in my heart. When my feet froze with fear, I arrived at that place. Yes, it was the place where the middle-aged woman was hammering nails, the place where the middle-aged woman killed Happy in touch, and the place where I met the middle-aged woman. Suddenly, I felt like someone was watching me, and I looked around. No, not someone, it felt like the middle-aged woman was watching me. The silence unique to the mountains and the fear that spread in my heart synced together, and my legs began to tremble. Without showing any concern for me, Shin approached that tree. He noticed something and crouched down. Happy. Hearing his words, I forgot about my trembling legs and walked up to him. Happy was already becoming part of the soil. His skull was exposed, with a slightly rusty nail still sticking in the middle of it. I tried to pull out the nail, but Shun said, "Wait," and took a photo. I was a little surprised by Shin's calmness, but I didn't say anything and tried to pull out the nail again. As soon as I grabbed the nail stuck in the skull, a multitude of bugs I had never seen before poured out all at once. I quickly withdrew my hand and stood up. I couldn't approach Happy's body, which was swarming with small insects and was overcome by nausea. Shin rubbed my back without saying anything. That night, I abandoned Happy twice. I am the weakest and worst person. Shin raised his camera again and was trying to take a photo of that tree. "Hey! Come over here!" Shin called out to me, having discovered something. I walked towards him hesitantly, feeling fearful. Shin pointed at something and said, "This wasn't here before, right?" When I looked where he was pointing, I saw countless photos with nails pierced through them. Wait, weren't these here before? No, the photos were different. To be precise, the photo of the 4 or 5-year-old girl I saw last time was next to it. In other words, the number of photos has increased. From their condition, it was evident that they were put up here about 2 or 3 days ago. The photo I saw last time was already so damaged by the wind and rain that I could hardly tell if the person in the picture was a girl. The new photo also seemed to be of a 4 or 5-year-old girl. At that moment, I didn't tell Shin, but I was momentarily worried, what if the new photo is of me? Shin took a photo of the pictures that were put up, and then said, "Let's take a picture of the carving in the secret base next." He started running again. I had a feeling that there was a middle-aged woman nearby and I was scared to be alone, so I hurried to catch up with Shin. As we approached the secret base, I felt a sense of discomfort and called out to Shin. Something was off. Normally, we should be able to see the roof of the base from here, but it was nowhere in sight. Shin noticed it too, and at that moment, the image of the middle-aged woman flashed through my mind. I had a bad feeling about this. My heart was pounding heavily. Shin suggested, "Let's take the back alley." I nodded silently. The back alley was a route through the bushes to the back of the base, separate from the conventional route we took through the trail. We had made this route as a precaution in case of an enemy attack on the base, but never did I expect it to come in handy like this. With this route, even if there was a middle-aged woman at the base, the chances of her finding us were extremely low. Shin and I crawled on all fours and slowly advanced through the tunnel in the bushes. When we reached a position about 5 meters behind the secret base, we figured out the reason for the base's abnormality. It was torn apart. The secret base we had built was reduced to mere pieces of lumber. We observed the area for a while, but there was no sign of the middle-aged woman, so we emerged from the bushes and arrived at the site of the secret base. We looked at the secret base that had been destroyed and felt like crying a little. The secret base was our second home with the 3 of us and 2 dogs. A large rock had fallen in a corner of the scattered wood, probably knocked over by someone. Someone? No, it was probably the middle-aged woman. Shin started taking photos silently. He uncovered a few pieces of wood and revealed a board that said "Curse June to death" and took a photo of it. At that moment, a fly flew out of a small gap in the board and we could see Tachi's body through the gap. Happy and Tachi. We realized that we had lost the 2 of them that were more precious to us than the secret base. Shin stood up and said, "All right, let's develop this camera quickly and take it to the police." We ran down the mountain and hurried to the police box in front of the station. If we show the photos taken by this camera, the middle-aged woman will be caught. We will be saved. We thought only of that as we ran. We stopped by a camera store on the way and requested the photos to be developed. We were told that it would be ready in 30 minutes, so we waited in the store. During that time, there was hardly any conversation between Shin and me. We were just eager for the photos to be developed. And 30 minutes passed. "We've arrived," the part-time female clerk greeted us. My friend and I hurriedly went to the cash register as if we had been waiting. The clerk looked a bit puzzled and said, "I've developed your photos, please check inside." She handed us an envelope containing the photos. Well, it's natural for her to look puzzled since the only photos developed were of a dead dog and a girl impaled by a nail. My friend immediately took out the photos from the envelope and checked them all. He then said, "It's all good, thank you very much," paid the fee and left the shop. We headed straight to the police box, convinced that everything would finally come to an end. We rushed into the police box near the station. "What's going on?" asked a young officer inside, who greeted us with a smile. My friend and I approached the officer and said, "Please help us." We told the officer about the events of that night, showing him the photos as evidence. We also mentioned that we were still being targeted by the middle-aged woman. When we finished telling our story, the officer calmly asked us, "Did you tell your parents?" We replied that we hadn't, and the officer then said, "Well, can you give me your home phone number then?" Shin exclaimed angrily, "Why do our parents have anything to do with this? We're the ones being targeted. By the way, my parents are a doctor and a nurse, and my older brother attends a famous private high school. We may be the wealthiest, but we also have the strictest household. We lied to our parents and went to our secret base that night, and if they find out, not only me and June, but especially me, will be in big trouble. Help us out. You're a police officer, right?" Shin pressed on. The officer let out a small smile and replied, "You guys are in elementary school, right? These things need to be told to your parents properly. But what's the name of your homeroom teacher?" To us, it sounded more like a threat. We couldn't help but feel a sense of distrust towards the officer. We thought, if we stay here, we'll be forced to give our address and then our parents will find out. I started to think that this police officer didn't believe our story. Despite our desperate pleas for help, he kept talking about parents and teachers. We even brought evidence in the form of a photo proving the existence of the middle-aged woman we were talking about. But when I showed the officer the photo and said, "This is the person who killed the dog," he surprised me by asking, "Wait, is this even a dog?" I was taken aback. The officer wasn't joking, he really didn't understand what he was looking at. As I looked at the photo more objectively, I realized that it might not look like a dog's corpse to someone who didn't know what they were looking for. The bones had turned a pale brown and only a few tufts of fur remained. Having seen Happy's body on the day after it was killed, I knew what it had looked like before the decay set in. But to someone who hadn't seen it before, the corpse might look like a dirty rock covered in a dirty rag. I calmly looked at the other photos. There were countless nails in the picture of the girl with the inscription "Curse June to Death" on the board. It's true that it's difficult to directly link this to the middle-aged woman's existence. Could the police officer be thinking it's just elementary school kids' prank and has been talking about parents and teachers this whole time? I began to feel that it was dangerous to stay here any longer. "I'm definitely calling our parents," I whispered to Shin. Shin nodded silently, moved his jaw a little, and signaled for us to leave. The next moment, Shin turned around quickly and ran. I followed him immediately and we escaped from the police box. We heard the officer calling out "Hey" from behind us, but we didn't look back and kept running. It didn't seem like the officer was chasing us. He probably thought that elementary school kids came to play a prank and ran away when their lie was about to be exposed. After confirming that the police officer wasn't following us, Shin and I sat down on the side of the road and held an emergency meeting. What do we do now? I don't know. We were at a loss. We had lost our last resort, the police, who didn't believe us, and we had no way to protect ourselves from the middle-aged woman. If we keep going like this, the woman will find out our address. I was scared. Then, Shin said, "Let's just be careful not to run into her for a while." But I immediately raised my voice and said, "That's impossible. As soon as she knows June's grade in class, she'll definitely find out about us too." "But, does she really intend to do something to us?" "What do you mean?" I asked. Well, remember when we ran into her on the way home from school? If she had wanted to do something, she could have done it then. And besides, if she really didn't forgive us, there would be some kind of curse or carving on the mountain, right? He was right. When we went to the mountain, there was no new curse. The secret base had been destroyed, but there was no new curse carving for me or June, whose full name was now known. Although I wanted to refute him in my heart, I didn't. I wanted to believe that the middle-aged woman didn't resent us as much as we thought, that she was forgetting us. Shin said, if she really resents us, she should take some kind of action, right, as if to reassure me. And maybe she's hanging around near the school not to find us, but to find the girl in the photo, he continued. Oh, I see. His words made me feel a little relieved. Or maybe it was more like I was trying to convince myself by repeating what Shin had said. It was almost like a form of escaping reality. Maybe Shin felt the same way. We couldn't find a way to escape from the middle-aged woman, so we just said those things to make ourselves feel better. But yeah, you're right. She'll forget about us eventually. She's already forgotten about us. What the hell, we wasted our time being scared. We should have made her cry. Seriously, let's make her cry. We tried to act tough with each other. In a sense, it was like we were desperate. I chatted with Shin for a while, gossiping about the middle-aged woman. As the surroundings started to get dim, we decided to head home. When we reached the point where we had to part ways, we exclaimed, "Let's check up on June tomorrow on the way back." Yeah, good idea, and waved each other goodbye with bright expressions. My heart felt a little brighter. That's right. As Shin said, the middle-aged woman has probably forgotten about us by now. I repeated to myself like a self-suggestion. I walked towards home with a light step, kicking stones on the way. When I looked up at the sky, there were no clouds, and countless stars twinkled, creating a refreshing night sky. It seemed foolish to have been so troubled by the middle-aged woman before. As I neared my house, I realized that there was an anime I wanted to watch that day, and I hurried home. My footsteps echoed through the quiet night neighborhood. Ha! I heard a different set of footsteps besides my own. I turned around. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, and there was nobody there. Was it just my imagination? Thinking that I was a coward, I started running again. Wait, someone's there. I stopped again and strained my eyes to look back. But there was nobody there after all. Even though I had heard someone else's footsteps running behind me, blending in with my own. Am I being mentally chased by the middle-aged woman without even realizing it, like June? Am I just too scared? I stood there for a while, staring back behind me. My heart, pounding, suddenly seemed to stop for a moment. About 15 meters behind me, someone was crouching in the shadow of a moped parked in front of a house. No, hiding. I couldn't see clearly in the moonlight, but one thing was clear. They're wearing a coat. I froze for a moment. The person hiding probably thought they hadn't been discovered, but their silhouette was clear. I was momentarily confused. It's the middle-aged woman. The middle-aged woman. My legs almost gave out, but then, on instinct maybe, the next moment, I have to run. I have to run, the other me ordered me. I ran as hard as I could, clearer headed than I had been at the sports festival. I couldn't hear anything except the sound of the wind cutting past me as I ran breathlessly. I ran towards my house in a daze. Only 10 meters left until I reached home. All right. I can run away from her. Suddenly, something crossed my mind. If I run into my house like this, there's no doubt that the woman will find out where I live. I quickly passed my house and continued running through the narrow residential streets, with no particular destination, just to shake off the middle-aged woman who was likely following me. After about 5 minutes, I was out of breath and started walking. I looked back, but I couldn't see any shadows or hear any footsteps of the middle-aged woman anymore. I began to walk towards my house, cautiously looking around me. As I approached my house again, I once again looked around cautiously and dashed to the front door. As a child of dual-income parents, I quickly unlocked the door, rushed inside, and locked it behind me. A sigh of relief escaped from me unconsciously. I thought I should report to Shin, but when I tried to take off my shoes and go upstairs, I heard a noise at the front door. I froze in the middle of taking off my shoes and stared at the front door. My house's front door is a sliding type with frosted glass and aluminum frames, and behind the frosted glass, there was a shadow of someone standing at the entrance. There was a middle-aged woman standing about a meter away from the entrance door, separated by the door itself. I held my breath, froze, and tried to make myself as still and quiet as possible. It was as if I was experiencing sleep paralysis, unable to move at all. I could only stare at the shadow of the middle-aged woman on the frosted glass. She stood there for a while, motionless, as if she knew that I was inside. Then, slowly, her left arm began to move. It reached towards the door handle. She tried to open the door. My heartbeat skyrocketed for the first time in my life. She confirmed that the door was locked and slowly retreated, but stayed in the same spot. I was still frozen. Suddenly, she moved closer to the door and crouched down, placing her left ear right against the frosted glass, trying to listen to what was happening inside the house. I could see her ear clearly through the glass. I was so nervous that I felt like I was about to throw up. My heart rate was at its peak, and I was afraid that the middle-aged woman would hear my heartbeat. After listening at the door for 2 or 3 minutes, the middle-aged woman stood up again and slowly took a step back while facing towards the side, gradually fading and eventually disappearing from view in the glass. Did she leave? I couldn't feel relieved at all. Because, did the middle-aged woman actually leave? Did she know I was here at the entrance? Is she still lurking around the house? If she had seen me enter this house and confirmed my presence before taking the actions just now, then without a doubt, the middle-aged woman would still be around the house. Slowly and carefully, I took off my shoes and moved to the living room. I didn't turn on any lights as it could reveal my presence. As soon as I entered the living room, I picked up the phone receiver and dialed Shin's number from memory. Shin answered on the 3rd ring. Shin. Something is wrong. The middle-aged woman came. She found me. I told Shin in a panic in a low voice. Ha? What's going on? What happened? Shin asked. A middle-aged woman came to the house. Do something quickly. I pleaded with Shin. Shin asked me calm down. Is anyone in the house? I said no one's here. Hurry and help me. Shin said first, check the locks. Where is the middle-aged woman now? I replied to him I don't know. But she was just outside the house earlier. Don't panic. First, check the locks. Got it? Okay. I'll check the locks, so please come quickly. I hung up the phone and headed to the bathroom to check the locks, being careful not to make any noise and relying on my senses to navigate the dark house. First, I gently closed the window in the bathroom. Next, I closed the window in the adjacent bath and locked it. Then, I went to the veranda to check the window there. Walking along the wall in the hallway, I entered the Japanese-style room with the veranda. Looking at the veranda window, I felt something was off. Though the window was closed and covered with lace curtains, there was a figure at the left end. Someone outside was pressing their face against the window, hands around their eyes like binoculars, peering into the room. Since the lights were off inside the house, it was brighter outside, and I could clearly see their figure. The middle-aged woman was clinging to the window like a lizard. Is this an animal instinct? Like a herbivore who has spotted a carnivorous animal, I crouched down instinctively. My whole body was trembling unconsciously. Can a middle-aged woman see me inside? The middle-aged woman peered into the room for a while, then slowly moved to the center of the window, maintaining the same posture. And then, an unpleasant sound came from the window. The woman's right hand was rubbing the window, while her left hand remained near her eyes, peering into the room. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The unpleasant sound continued, and my fear reached its peak. I didn't know what was going on, but I was so afraid of the woman's strange behavior that I couldn't even scream. Then the middle-aged woman suddenly turned around and ran away at an incredible speed. I couldn't move, I just stared at the window, not knowing what had happened. Then I saw a red light flashing on the road outside the window. The police are here. I finally grasped the situation. The woman must have run away when she noticed the police car passing by. I stayed crouched for a while, trembling. Suddenly, the phone rang. My heart nearly stopped. I looked at the display and saw that it was a call from Shin's home. I quickly answered the phone in a panic. Shin, what's up? Me, I saw someone peeping into my room, but then they ran away. Shin, oh really? Maybe your parents came back? Me, no, I think a police car happened to pass by and scared off the middle-aged woman who was peeping. Shin, I see. That's a relief. I actually reported a suspicious person near your house. But if she knows where you live, you might need to tell your parents about it soon. I'm going to tell my parents today. You should tell yours too. This is serious. Me, okay. And then I hung up the phone. 30 minutes later, my mother returned home from work. I ran to the entranceway with the lights off and burst into tears when I saw her face, feeling relieved. My mother was bewildered, but I apologized at the beginning and explained everything from that night to just now. While I was explaining, my father came home and my mother told him what had happened. Afterwards, my father went to the Japanese-style room to look at the window glass. It had been severely scratched by something sharp. I had a gut feeling that the sharp object was a 5-cent nail, about 15 centimeters long. My parents didn't scold me. My mother hugged me, and my father called the police. About 10 minutes later, the police arrived. My father explained the situation to them. I stayed in the living room with my mother for a while, but then a police officer came in and asked about the events of that night. He asked about Happy in Touch, the photo of the girl with the nail in the tree, the fact that June's name was carved into the secret base, and everything related to the middle-aged woman. I told him everything, including what had happened just now. A person who seemed to be a forensics expert arrived and collected fingerprints from the window while I was talking. The police officer was most interested in the story of the girl in the photo. He asked about her appearance and whether I knew her, but I had to answer that I didn't know much. They also had me draw a map of the back mountain, and they promised to investigate the area the next day. They also promised to strengthen nighttime patrols around our home. Eventually, they didn't find any fingerprints. After a while, the parents of Shun and June called. They talked about how to explain the situation to the school, rather than the middle-aged woman. That night, I slept with my parents for the first time in years. I wasn't embarrassed at all, but rather scared of the middle-aged woman and couldn't fall asleep easily. When my mother woke me up the next morning, it was already past 8 a.m. I panicked, thinking I would be late for school, but my mother told me to stay home for the day. Apparently, she had already explained the situation to the school. My father had already left for work, but my mother took the day off from her part-time job. I thought to myself, Shin and June probably aren't going to school today either. But I didn't dare call them. Shin was probably getting scolded by his strict parents, and June's parents were probably shocked to learn the truth about their son's truancy, so I was afraid to call. I stayed in my room, hoping that the middle-aged woman would be caught by the police soon and that I could be freed from the fear as soon as possible. For some reason, my mother never mentioned the middle-aged woman. I thought it was considerate of her towards me, so I didn't say anything either. After having lunch, I went back to my room, and then I heard a dull sound outside the house, Dosu. I immediately thought, it's Shin. Whenever he called me out, he often threw a pebble at my window instead of ringing the doorbell. I looked out the window. I thought Shin would be by the utility pole in the alley in front of the house, but he wasn't there. I searched the visible area, wondering if he was hiding somewhere, but he was nowhere to be found. At that moment, I heard my mother's voice from the front yard below my room. "Ah!" Startled, I opened the window and leaned out to look down. My mother was looking down at the ground, holding her hand to her mouth and looking surprised. I didn't know what was happening, so I asked, "What's wrong?" My mother jerked at the sound of my voice, looked up at me with a surprised expression, and pointed silently at the outside wall of the house. I sensed something ominous, but looked in the direction she was pointing. There was a purplish liquid and a gelatinous substance on the wall, which was probably the source of the thud sound from earlier. I looked down at my mother's feet to search for something, and saw the large dead body of a bullfrog with its entrails exposed. My mother stood still in shock for a while. I immediately thought of the middle-aged woman and looked around for her, but there was no sign of her anywhere. My mother suddenly ran into the living room, as if remembering something, and called the police. My mother's face was pale. Perhaps it was the first time she realized the abnormality of the middle-aged woman. Yes, that woman is abnormal. She must be grinning at our surprised faces after throwing the frog. She's probably watching me closely from nearby. I got goosebumps. Please, police, come quickly. I shouted in my mind. This house is no longer a home. To the middle-aged woman, it's like a birdcage where she can see our every move. I felt like we were being constantly watched. After a while, a patrol car arrived. It was two different officers from yesterday. One of the officers examined the exterior wall and the road where the frog was likely thrown, while the other officer repeatedly asked us vague questions like, "Did you see anything?" and "What was the situation at the time?" Finally, the officer said something that increased our anxiety. "You received harassment yesterday as well, didn't you? It's highly likely that the culprit will do the same thing again soon." I couldn't bear it anymore and pleaded with tears in my eyes, "She's a woman in her 40s wearing a coat. Please catch her soon." The police officer then said, "I went to see the mountain earlier and I found a dead dog, a board with a friend's name carved on it, and a photo of a girl. We will investigate this and catch the culprit." He patted me on the shoulder and went to talk to my mother, saying something about contacting my father. They took pictures of the frog stain on the wall and its body, and the police left after about an hour. My father came home a little later, before 5 o'clock, probably worried about what had happened. My mother was preparing dinner, and my father was reading the evening paper, but they both seemed uneasy. Of course, I was also anxious about when the middle-aged woman would come next. The family had a quiet dinner that night, with only the sound of the TV echoing in the room. Then, after 11 p.m., we all went to bed, leaving the living room lights on for safety. That night, the whole family slept together in the same room. Of course, it was hard to fall asleep. How much time had passed? Suddenly, we heard a deep male voice from the entrance, along with a strange voice that we recognized as the middle-aged woman's scream. We all jumped up and my father hurried to the entrance. My mother hugged me tightly and we stayed in the bedroom. I heard the sound of my father unlocking the door and opening it. As the door opened, the familiar and strong voice of a man echoed through the entrance, along with the bizarre screams of a middle-aged woman. The whole family woke up, and my father rushed to the entrance. My mother held me tightly, and we both stayed in the bedroom. I heard the sound of the key turning in the lock and the door opening. Then, I heard the middle-aged woman screaming again. So frustrating. A man's voice also yelled, "Stay still. Don't resist." At that moment, I realized that they were police officers who had caught the criminal. The middle-aged woman continued to scream in a bizarre manner, and I was trembling in my mother's arms. But my father came back and asked me, "They caught the suspect. They want to confirm if you saw the person you encountered in the mountains. Are you okay?" Of course, I wasn't okay, but I convinced myself that everything was finally over and that I could put an end to it. I replied, "Yes," and slowly walked down the stairs toward the entrance. I could hear the middle-aged woman yelling from the entrance, "You! Damn you! How could you make me suffer like this?" I was frozen, but my father grabbed my shoulder and led me to stand in front of the middle-aged woman who had been restrained by the two police officers. I could hear the suspect, a middle-aged woman, screaming at the top of her lungs, "You! You! Are you going to torment me too?" However, my father held my shoulder and walked me towards the woman, who was being held by two police officers. The officers held her shoulders tightly, forcing her chin to rub against the ground. The woman glared at me with bloodshot eyes and a disheveled appearance, saliva dripping from her mouth like a wild dog. One of the officers asked me, "Are you sure she's the one you saw in the mountains?" I was overwhelmed by the woman's intimidating presence and couldn't speak, so I just nodded silently. The officer immediately handcuffed her and said, "You're the one who attempted arson." Even after being handcuffed, the woman continued to struggle and shout, but the officers managed to take her away in their patrol car. One officer returned to us and began to explain the situation. "Let me explain everything." The police officer said, "While patrolling in front of your house, I saw a person's shadow at the entrance. It was that woman. She was crouching down and lighting a fire with a lighter. You have old newspapers placed at the entrance, right?" My mother replied, "No, we don't have them." The officer then pointed to a bundle of newspapers nearby and asked, "So did that woman prepare this too?" It was a bundle of newspapers that didn't belong to the newspaper company we subscribed to. The officer noticed something and took something out of the bundle of newspapers, a wooden board with my full name and the words "Prayer for Death by Fire" carved into it. My entire body was covered in goosebumps. She had indeed gone through the trouble of researching my name. If the police hadn't been patrolling. I started to feel a bit dizzy. My mother began to cry and hugged me while stroking my head. The officer remained silent for a while before saying, "Actually, that woman is a little mentally unstable. She lives in the neighboring town, and there have been quite a few complaints. Although there have also been sympathetic voices," and began to talk about the middle-aged woman. Police officers said that woman lost her husband and son in a car accident a year ago. Since then, she's been emotionally unstable and borderline schizophrenic. There have been disputes with neighbors and such. We were able to identify her from a photograph of a girl that was found in the mountains. 2 years ago, her husband and son were killed when they swerved to avoid the girl who had run into the road. The girl was unharmed, but ever since then, that woman has been harassing her family. They never filed a complaint since it was just an accident, but it seems like that woman has been holding a grudge against the girl. After hearing this story, I couldn't sympathize with the woman at all. Her obsession was palpable, and the fact that she was diagnosed with emotional instability and schizophrenia only made it worse. Would she be released soon, and would I have to live in fear of her again? The police officer's words filled me with a sense of despair rather than relief. 5 years passed, and Shun, June, and I all went to different high schools. We had completely lost touch with each other and were walking different paths in life. Of course, we couldn't forget about the middle-aged woman incident, but our fear had faded quite a bit. During winter break in our first year of high school, I received a call from my old friend Shin. "Hey! Long time no see." After exchanging greetings, Shin said, "I actually got into a motorcycle accident and broke my leg and hip. I'm in the hospital." I replied, "What? That sucks. Which hospital are you in? Should I come visit you since you must be lonely?" Shin then said, "Well, that's one reason, but do you remember the middle-aged woman? Not about the incident itself, but do you remember what she looked like?" I asked, "Why? What's going on all of a sudden?" Shin replied, "Every night after visiting hour's end, this weird old lady comes to peek at me, grinning creepily." As soon as I heard what June said, the face of the middle-aged woman came vividly back to me. That clenched teeth face from the night we first met, the leering face I saw on my way home, and the crazed screaming face I saw at my front door. I had been trying to forget, but it was an unforgettable trauma. I responded to June with, "What the hell are you talking about? Forget about it already. Are you really that weak-minded?" I was trying to convince myself as well. June replied, "Yeah, I know what you mean. In situations like this, you can't help but feel small." I retorted, "You haven't changed a bit, even though I hadn't really grown much since that day either." I asked him which hospital he was in and told him, "I'll come visit you with some erotic magazines soon," before hanging up. But as soon as I hung up, I had a bad feeling. The middle-aged woman, June's words, were bothering me. After hanging up the phone, I thought for a while. There's no way that the middle-aged woman would appear now, right? And besides, we didn't do anything to her. We just happened to witness her cursed ritual, and yet the price we paid was too great. We met her by chance on a mountain at night, and she attacked us out of nowhere. We didn't take anything from her or hurt her in any way. She took away our happiness and touch, destroyed our secret base, and most of all, implanted fear in the three of us. Even though the middle-aged woman is persistent, I don't think she'll come after us anymore. It's silly to think this way, but if I were to hold a grudge, my anger would be directed towards the girl in the photo. I forced myself to accept this idea. 2 days later, I took a day off from work, bought 3 erotic books from a bookstore, and headed to the hospital where June was hospitalized. I had mixed feelings of excitement to see June again and anticipation for what he had told me on the phone. I arrived at the hospital in the afternoon. June's room was on the 3rd floor, in a 6-person room with the nameplate 303. I found June's name on the door, and saw him sitting by the window at the far end of the room. Hey June, long time no see. Oh, hey man. It's been a while. I was relieved to see that June was much more energetic than I had expected. When I gave him the promised erotic books, he was delighted like a child receiving a new toy. We talked about various things, just like old times when we were in elementary school. It was a lot of fun to be around June, and I found myself laughing innocently. Before I knew it, it was almost time for the end of visiting hours. Well, I guess I should get going. Actually, I told you on the phone, but... June began to say something with a serious expression. I said, it's about the middle-aged woman, right? Then June said, I think it's just my imagination, but there's always this lady who comes around this time, and there's something. I don't know, it just feels weird. I replied, so it's just your imagination. Don't be so jumpy. Then June seemed a little annoyed and said, I'm just saying it might be a misunderstanding. Sorry for being such a scaredy cat. The atmosphere grew heavy. I tried to apologize to June when suddenly we heard the sound of a cart rolling down the hallway. June muttered, she's here. I looked towards the entrance and saw the cart stop in front of the door. Then the door opened and there was a lady in work clothes. I said, what the hell? Don't scare us like that. You're just the lady who collects the trash, right? Feeling a bit relieved. The lady began to collect the trash from each patient's bin, and finally approached June's bed. June whispered, take a look, and I caught a glimpse of the lady's face. I held my breath. She looks similar, or is it just a coincidence that she's a middle-aged woman? I stared at the person for a while, and then the cleaning lady turned to us and bowed before leaving the room. June asked, so, what do you think? Was I just being paranoid and scared? I answered, no way, man. She's just a regular cleaning lady. But still, she looked similar. Is it just a coincidence that she resembles someone else? Well, I gotta go now. Don't think too much about it and hurry up and get out of here. I said as I left the hospital room. The image of the cleaning lady wouldn't leave my mind. The main characteristic of the middle-aged woman was her craziness. The cleaning lady had a calm expression. If the cleaning lady was the middle-aged woman, she would have screamed and attacked me as soon as she saw my face. Yeah, she's probably just a look-alike. But for some reason, I was still scared of being in the hospital, so I quickly went home. Even after returning home, I couldn't completely dispel the idea that the middle-aged woman was actually the cleaning lady. It continued to bother me. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it until I fell asleep. The next day, I finished my part-time job early and decided to go to the hospital. It was a 30-minute bike ride from my workplace, and by the time I arrived, it was already past visiting hours and it was clear that the cleaning lady had already left. I entered the hospital through a temporary entrance and headed straight to June's room. When I sneaked into June's room, his bed was completely closed off by curtains. I thought he was asleep, so I quietly opened the curtains and peeked inside. Whoa! June jumped up in surprise and quickly hid something under his pillow. It looked like he had been reading an erotic book. I didn't point out the erotic book and said to June, I thought you were bored, so I came to visit. June looked a little awkward and suggested, hey, let's go to the lobby and have some tea. It's boring at this time. I brought the wheelchair over to June's bed and helped him get into it. Let's make sure we don't get caught by the nurses since the lobby is on the first floor, June said in a low voice. We snuck through the hospital, hiding in shadows whenever we thought we might be seen, until we finally made it to the lobby. Unlike during the day, the lobby was completely dark except for the vending machines and emergency lights. This reminds me of that night, sneaking around with you in the darkness, June said. Yeah, why did we end up tailing him? I replied, and June fell silent. I hesitated to tell June about the reason why I came to the hospital today, which was about the cleaning lady and my thoughts on her. After all, June was going to be hospitalized here for almost a month, and bringing up such a topic might trigger another unknown phenomenon like last time. But then June suddenly said, you're thinking about that lady, aren't you? Caught off guard, I pretended not to know what he was talking about, but June persisted, I'm sure you are. She looks like her, or maybe she's even the middle-aged woman. He pressed on with a serious expression. Overwhelmed by June's forcefulness, I admitted, she did look like her, though the atmosphere was completely different, but yeah, they look alike. June hung his head and started to speak. I told you on the phone before, but. June lowered his voice slightly and began to speak. On the second night of my hospitalization, my legs and back hurt so much that I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even turn over, and it was already lights out time. So, I tried to close my eyes and sleep, and when I was starting to feel drowsy, I felt a gaze on me. I thought it was one of the nurses doing rounds and ignored it, but then I heard some heavy breathing. I wondered if it was the breathing of the patient next to me. I opened my eyes slightly and saw that my bed curtain was open about 3 centimeters, and someone was peering at me through the gap. Their eyes were clearly looking at me and they had a smirking expression. I was so scared that I pretended to be asleep. Then, when I woke up, it was morning. Later, I thought about it and realized that the eyes of the person who was peering at me were very familiar. They were just like the eyes of the cleaning lady. With a smirk in her eyes, I know that look. The scene June described immediately came to my mind, as I too have been stared at with that same smirk by a middle-aged woman before. Furthermore, June continued his story, and that cleaning lady who comes to collect the trash, whenever I glance over, she seems to be staring at me with those half-smirking eyes. Upon hearing this, my suspicion that the middle-aged woman and the cleaning lady were one and the same became a certainty. She had indeed returned to society. My hand holding the canned coffee shook slightly, not because of the cold, but because my body was reacting to the fear that it remembered. At that moment, a sudden light shone behind me. Hey! June, a nurse on patrol, stood there. I thought you weren't here, and here you are. You know you're not supposed to wander around after lights out, right? And your friend's visiting hours are long over. She was quite angry. June replied, yeah. Sorry about that. See you again soon. The nurse pushed his wheelchair back to the hospital room. Take care, I said to him. I decided to head home for now. The hospital at night was eerie. Was it because we had been talking about that woman earlier? As I walked, I saw someone in the hallway ahead of me. It was a middle-aged woman, a cleaning lady, perhaps? No, it seemed more like a middle-aged woman, and she was doing something. No mistake about it. It's a middle-aged woman. She's doing something near the entrance/exit. I quickly hid and observed the middle-aged woman's actions. It seems like she hasn't noticed me and is doing something. She's in a crouched position doing something. I strained my eyes and observed for a while. She's fumbling with a large bag and dividing it into smaller portions in the other. Could it be that she's sorting out the collected hospital waste? In our local area, sorting out garbage is a rule. Just then, the same nurse from earlier spoke up from behind me. Hey, you're still here? I'm not playing around, so cut it out. I was startled and said, oh, no, I'm leaving. Thanks. When I looked at the entrance/exit, the middle-aged woman noticed me and stared at me. No mistake about it. It's a middle-aged woman. She's doing something near the entrance/exit. I quickly hid and observed the middle-aged woman's actions. It seems like she hasn't noticed me and is doing something. She's in a crouched position doing something. I strained my eyes and observed for a while. She's fumbling with a large bag and dividing it into smaller portions in the other. Could it be that she's sorting out the collected hospital waste? In our local area, sorting out garbage is a rule. Just then, the same nurse from earlier spoke up from behind me. Hey, you're still here? I'm not playing around, so cut it out. I was startled and said, oh, no, I'm leaving. Thanks. When I looked at the entrance/exit, the middle-aged woman noticed me and stared at me. Good grief, the nurse spat out and went back on patrol. No, that's not important. The middle-aged woman has spotted me. What should I do? Should I run away? Should I ask for help from the nurse from earlier? My head started spinning, and my heart raced faster. As I continued to stare at the middle-aged woman, she looked away from me and resumed sorting the garbage as if nothing had happened. I hesitated, surprised by her unexpected action. I had expected her to attack me, continue staring at me, or even grin at me, given her previous behavior towards me. I stood there for a while, watching the middle-aged woman silently sorting the garbage, seemingly unconcerned about me. Is this some kind of strategy? I wondered, But another thought suddenly occurred to me. Middle-aged woman is not cleaning lady? Could it be that she just resembled someone else and was a completely different person after all? I walked towards the entrance with determination, towards that woman. As I approached her slowly, she showed no signs of noticing me. Nevertheless, I kept my eyes fixed on her as I walked closer and closer. In no time, I had reached her from behind without any incident. The woman was sorting through trash with rubber gloves on her hands, separating it into categories of burnable, non-burnable, and PET bottles. As I watched her, I thought to myself, she must be someone else. Suddenly, she turned around and spoke to me, saying, "You've grown so much, haven't you?" My mind went completely blank. She knows about my past? Who is this person? I thought. It was then that I realized that she was, indeed, a middle-aged woman. The woman stopped her work and walked towards me, taking off her rubber gloves with a big smile on her face. I didn't know what kind of expression I should make. I was probably making a face distorted with fear. The woman approached me and asked, "You become so grown up, how old are you now?" In high school? I didn't understand the meaning behind that woman's words. What was going on? Was she making fun of me? Was she mocking me for being scared? Was she enjoying my reaction? When I remained silent, she continued, "Your friend has grown up too, June. He's unfortunate to have broken his bones, but his older brother should take notice." I couldn't understand what she was talking about. Did she forget what she did to us a few years ago? I couldn't believe this person was the one who gave us the trauma of fear. The woman continued to smile as she said, "There was another one, the dark-skinned kid, how is he doing?" She was talking about Shin. What was going on with this woman? It was like she was meeting an old friend after a long time. This wasn't normal. Was she doing this on purpose? Did she have some kind of motive for behaving this way? I kept my eyes on the middle-aged woman and paid attention to her movements. Does she understand what she's saying? I thought to myself. I'm sorry for what happened back then. Can you forgive me? The middle-aged woman said as she approached me. I couldn't find the words to respond and simply took a step back in silence. I should have apologized sooner. The middle-aged woman continued. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was she genuinely apologizing, or was she up to something? She finally got close enough to touch and said, "I wanted to apologize properly to all three of you." I really did. She kept coming closer and closer until she was within breathing distance. Unlike back then, I was now about 20 centimeters taller and physically stronger. I thought to myself, if she touches me, even with just one finger, I'll knock her out. But as she looked up at me, her gaze didn't betray any resentment, hatred, or anger. She just looked straight into my eyes. I was in a bad place back then and did some terrible things. The middle-aged woman apologized sincerely. I couldn't handle the tension any longer and ran away from the scene. As I ran, I looked back to see if she was following me, but to my surprise, she wasn't there. I stopped and thought for a moment. Was she really apologizing from the bottom of her heart? I couldn't bring myself to trust her, but that was to be expected given what happened before. I went back to the area where I saw her earlier and saw her once again wearing rubber gloves and sorting through piles of garbage. Seeing her working so hard made me wonder if she really had turned a new leaf. In the end, I just went home without saying anything to her. I lay down on my bed in my room and thought to myself, can humans really change so much? The person who used to have a demon-like expression and tried to kill Happy Touch, and cornered me, Shin, and June, even attempted arson. Can they really utter sincere words of apology like "I'm sorry"? No, perhaps I myself have changed after that incident. Have I become paranoid and turned into a cold person who can't trust others? Will believing in the apology from the middle-aged woman free me from the psychological curse of that incident? I must meet the middle-aged woman again and talk to her directly. I won't run away this time. With that determination, I went to bed that night. The next day, I took a day off from work and went to the hospital. First, I entered June's hospital room and explained what had happened the day before. Then I told him that I planned to meet with the middle-aged woman and talk to her directly. At first, June opposed my opinion, saying that the middle-aged woman had not changed. But what I said, Are we going to live our whole lives being afraid of the middle-aged woman's existence and holding on to our trauma? He agreed to come along and said, if we're going to meet and talk to the middle-aged woman, I'll go with you. There was a moment of silence. As time ticked by, the end of visit chime sounded, and at the same time, the sound of a garbage collection cart could be heard coming from the end of the hallway. "She's coming," muttered June. I looked towards the door. The cart sound stopped in front of our room and the door opened. The middle-aged woman in a work uniform entered and gave a nod of acknowledgement. June and I followed her movements with our eyes. The woman began to collect the garbage from the bin in each bed, starting from the one furthest away. She was greeted by a patient thanking her for her work, and she smiled and nodded in response. It was hard to believe that this woman was the same person from before. Finally, the middle-aged woman arrived at June's bed to collect the garbage. The middle-aged woman didn't make eye contact and just gave a slight nod before starting to collect the garbage. I didn't know what to say, so I observed her for a while until June spoke up. "Hey lady, what's your deal?" The woman stopped her work and remained silent with her head down. June continued, "You remember me, right? You never even apologized for what you did." I was nervous. I didn't expect June to suddenly speak with a sharp tone. The woman remained bowed and softly said, "I'm sorry." June seemed surprised by her honest response and looked at me with a puzzled expression. I asked her, "Are you really sorry?" The woman turned to face me and said, "I'm truly sorry, because of what I did. June Cohen was in this accident. Because of what I did, I'm really sorry." June and I were even more confused. Was the conversation veering off track? I said, "No, everything from when you did terrible things to my dog and came to my house, it's all included." The middle-aged woman apologized in a voice that sounded like she was about to cry, saying, "I'm so sorry. If only I hadn't done those things, this accident wouldn't have happened. I'm really sorry." All the patients in the quiet room turned their gaze to us as they listened to the conversation. The woman picked up the trash from June's bed and apologized again before quickly leaving the room with her head bowed. The strange atmosphere lingered in the room for a while. June exclaimed, "What the hell was that?" She had nothing to do with my accident. What did she misunderstand? As I listened to the woman's behavior and words, I couldn't help but think that something was off about her. Although her apology seemed sincere, she apologized for performing a curse ritual. She appeared to truly believe in the curse. June said, "Back then, she was a terrifying presence, and I still have trauma from it, but now I realize she's just a crazy occult believer." He spoke with a refreshed expression, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. I responded, "Yeah, and we've gotten bigger and stronger since then." We exchanged a few more words before I left the hospital room and headed home. On my way, I thought about Shin and decided to tell him about what had happened. Perhaps if I shared this story with him, it would help him overcome the trauma from that day. Upon arriving home, I immediately called a former teammate from the soccer club to ask for Shin's phone number. I then called Shin's mobile phone. "Hey! Long time no talk." Shin's familiar voice greeted me. We chatted about recent events before I told him about June's accident and hospitalization, the fact that a middle-aged woman was working as a cleaner there, and how the woman seemed to have undergone a complete personality change from the past. Shin was quite surprised to hear about the woman's apology. Finally, Shin suggested that the three of us should celebrate June's recovery when he gets discharged from the hospital. The next day, I visited June in the hospital and told him, "Shin said we should celebrate your recovery as soon as you get out of here. Come back home and let's have a party." June was overjoyed to hear the news. About a week had passed without visiting the hospital. There was no particular reason, but with the new school year starting, I didn't have much time. Besides, it seemed that the middle-aged woman had reformed, so I wasn't as worried as before. I figured if anything happened, June would call me. Then one day, June called me and said he would be discharged next week. I congratulated him and asked about the middle-aged woman, but he said there was nothing special and she was just doing her job collecting garbage. Another week passed, and June was discharged. I stopped by his house after school and he came out on crutches. His leg was still in a cast, but he seemed completely energetic. We chatted for a while in his room. In the evening, after having dinner, I called Shin. "June's out of the hospital." I said. Oh, really? We have to celebrate his recovery. I want to come over as soon as possible, but I'm busy with club activities, so I'll probably come at the end of the month, he replied. And then on the last Saturday of the month, the three of us, me, Shin, and June, met up for the first time since elementary school. We arranged to meet at the McDonald's in front of the station at noon. It had been a while since I had seen Shin, and despite it being winter, he had a slight tan and looked a bit like a fashionable guy. Anyway, we spent the afternoon catching up on each other's high school experiences, our love story, and reminiscing about old times. Of course, we also talked about middle-aged woman. The woman who we were all terrified of back then was now just a garbage collector. We told Shin all the details of what happened at the hospital, and he laughed and said, nowadays, we could just knock her out if she ever attacked us again. For us, middle-aged woman was now a distant memory, a character from our past who no longer haunted us. As the evening approached, we went to a karaoke box to continue our reunion. In celebration of our reunion, we ordered some drinks. At that time, we were able to get tipsy enough after about 4 to 5 drinks each, and we were in high spirits as we sang along to the songs. After about 2 hours, we started to get bored of singing, and that's when Shin made a proposal. Alright, let's go to our secret base. Let's go there to pay our respects to Happy and Touch, whom we abandoned back then. For a moment, the air froze. Shin and I were left speechless. We didn't expect him to suggest going to that place. Shin then taunted us, "What's wrong with you guys? Are you scared or something?" Ha ha ha. He seemed to be slightly drunk. Shin's words provoked our drunk friend, June, who angrily responded, "What did you say? Who's scared? Are you trying to pick a fight with us, Shin?" While drunk, I thought the situation and said, "Hey, you should stop. First of all, June is holding a cane, right?" But Shin immediately responded, "Oh, I see, if he's holding a cane, he can't run away, huh?" Ha ha ha, they were both heavily intoxicated. June became even more agitated and said, "Shut up. If you want to go, I'll go with you. Don't chicken out halfway, you hear me?" It was like a childish argument. I think both Shin and June were too drunk to back down. It would be less scary with 3 people. We left the karaoke box, stopped at a convenience store, and stocked up on snack and drink which the 2 of them loved. Then, we went to my house by taxi, picked up some lighting equipment, and headed to the hill behind the elementary school. We got off the taxi at the entrance of the mountain, and the driver looked at us suspiciously. As we approached the familiar mountain where we used to play together, I remembered the events of that day. I couldn't believe we were entering this place again on such a late night. However, June confidently said, "Let's go in," as he walked in with his cane. Shin followed behind him, grinning and holding a flashlight. I reminded June to watch his step and followed Shin. Once we entered the mountain, I was surprised to see that the scenery had changed since the last time we were here. Or maybe it was us who had changed, and that's why the view looked different. On our way up the mountain, Shin teased June by saying things like, "What if we see a middle-aged woman? I'll leave you behind and run away," and made jokes the whole time. I would actually leave too. Surprisingly, everything went smoothly, and we arrived at that place in about 30 minutes. We approached the tree where the middle-aged woman had performed a cursed ritual on that day, slowly shining our lights. The tree that once witnessed the ritual now appeared as a normal, old tree with visible nail marks and holes that were likely removed by the police. We stood there for a while gazing at the marks until Shin pointed out that this is where Happy died, right, while shining his light on the ground. Although Happy's body was long gone, we remembered the exact spot. I placed some snacks and drink as an offering, and the 3 of us bowed our heads in prayer before heading towards the secret base ruins. On the way to the secret base, June said, "Despite everything that happened, it's still nostalgic, isn't it?" Then Shin replied, "Yeah, if only we hadn't come to stay at the secret base that night, we wouldn't have any bad memories." Indeed, if we hadn't encountered the middle-aged woman on this mountain, this place would have been a sacred ground for us. We were around here, right? Shin stopped. The site of the secret base. There was no trace of it anymore. Even the pieces of wood that had been scattered that day were gone. June silently crouched down, placed some snacks and drinks, and prayed. Shin and I also prayed with our hands together. After a while of silence, Shin spoke up. If Happy and Touch weren't around, we might not even be here now. June responded with a simple yeah. And I added, in the end, even the middle-aged woman reformed. It feels like we're finally free from that nightmare. We remained quiet for a while. Suddenly, Shin shone his flashlight around the area and the pond in front of us, saying, "This place used to be our secret place, but it seems like a lot of people come here now." He noticed that there were quite a few snack bags and empty cans lying around where he shone the light. I said, "It's true, there was no garbage around back then. I wonder if the kids today even know this place?" June continued, "We used to always take our trash home seriously." At that moment, Shin exclaimed, "What the?" Startled by his voice, June and I looked where his light was shining and saw garbage stuck to a tree. Upon closer inspection, we saw countless candy wrappers, empty cans, and magazines nailed to the tree. "What is this?" Shin approached with his light while June and I followed. "Someone playing a prank?" I asked as I looked at the garbage that was nailed down. Then, June suddenly froze and said with a trembling voice, "Oh no. This is the garbage I threw away at the hospital." "What?" Shin and I asked in confusion. June replied, "I threw it away at the hospital." As he stepped back, while shouting, "Hey June! Pull yourself together. This can't be real." Shin ripped off one of the candy wrappers nailed to the tree with a nail. Watching this, June made a strange sound and fell on his butt, saying, "Oh." Surprised by his actions, Shin then suddenly yelled, "Oh," and threw the bag he was holding. "Ha!" I looked at the bag and saw "Curse June to Death" written on the back in marker. I thought, no way, and started peeling off the garbage nailed to the tree one by one to check the backs. All of them said, "Curse June to Death." June remained frozen on the ground. Shin absent-mindedly picked up some trash that was scattered around and said to me, "Hey, look at this." It also had "Curse June to Death" written on it. Unbelievable, it was written on all the trash scattered around us. That was the first time I realized it. That middle-aged woman never truly reformed. She had been holding a grudge against us the whole time. Even when I saw her at the hospital, desperately sorting out the trash with rubber gloves on, she was only separating June's garbage. All of her apologies to us were lies. Suddenly, I felt an intense chill and instinctively thought, "We have to get out of here." I urged June to pull himself together and said, "Let's go." But June was broken, on the verge of a breakdown, muttering, "My trash. My trash." Shin and I carried June and descended the mountain. It's been 8 years since then. Of course, we haven't returned to the mountain. We haven't seen the middle-aged woman either. I wonder if she still holds a grudge against us. Is she watching us from somewhere? But the three of us are still alive. However, June still can't walk.